Thanks everyone for joining our Budget Beat call. This is Precious Butu, Outreach and Operations Coordinator at the Washington State Budget and Policy Center. Today on Budget Beat, Jennifer Tran from the Budget and Policy Center will share findings from the newest Kids Count in Washington report about how advancing equity for kids begins with early learning. We will also hear from Roxana Norouzi from OneAmerica about how dual language education benefits all students and effectively closes the opportunity gap. For those of you who are not familiar with the Budget and Policy Center, we are a research organization dedicated to advancing the prosperities of all Washingtonians. We host these calls throughout the legislative session to provide relevant information and news from Olympia. So a few housekeeping notes before we jump in. There are a number of people on the line, so we have muted all lines to avoid background noise. If you have questions for us, please send them to us using the chat function on ReadyTalk, and we will respond to as many as we can during the call. We will be recording this Budget Beat call, which will be posted on our website soon. So, as I said, the focus of today's call is advancing racial equity in education. So let's start with early learning. Jennifer, can you please tell us more about Kids Count and the latest Kids Count research brief?
Thank you, Precious. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Kids Count in Washington, we're a partnership between the Children's Alliance and the Washington State Budget and Policy Center. Together, we gather and analyze data on how kids are doing in our state and then use that information to turn it into action. So our most recent report, which was released last week, is an analysis estimating how expanding the Early Childhood Education Assistance Program, ECAP, our state's preschool program serving families with low incomes, we would be able to improve kindergarten readiness in the state overall and help close the racial gap in kindergarten readiness. In Washington State, our goal is that by 2020, 90% of children enter kindergarten ready to learn, with race and family income no longer a predictor of kindergarten readiness. To give you a sense of where we're at in reaching that goal, the most recent data from the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction shows that currently only 47% of children enter kindergarten prepared. And when we break that down by race and ethnicity, we see that many groups have much lower rates of readiness. So our analysis that I'll be reviewing today estimates how expanding ECAP could increase kindergarten readiness across the state. So some background and context about ECAP. ECAP is the state preschool program for 3- and 4-year-olds that provides education, health services, family support, and parent engagement. Families qualify if they're living at or below 110% of the federal poverty level, which is $26,730 for a family of 4 in 2017. In the last school year, about 13,000 children were enrolled in ECAP. And according to the Department of Early Learning, 42% of those children were from single-family homes, 16% had a parent experiencing mental health issues, and 12% were in families currently or previously receiving Child Protective Services, Family Response Services, or Indian Child Welfare. So ECAP gives many children whose families may not otherwise be able to afford high-quality preschool access to opportunities that promote kindergarten readiness. ECAP has also been shown to be an effective program. Children that have participated in ECAP have higher rates of kindergarten readiness than children who do not. And those that have participated continue to do well when you look at their 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade test scores. Currently, the Washington State Department of Early Learning estimates that there are nearly 23,000 children across the state who are eligible for this program but are not currently being served. So we wanted to know how many more children would be ready for kindergarten if ECAP was expanded to serve all 23,000 of these children, and how would that affect kindergarten readiness by race and ethnicity. You'll see on this slide a text box from our report that explains what we're talking about when we refer to kindergarten readiness. And essentially, kindergarten teachers and ECAP educators assess students on 6 developmental domains: social emotional, physical, language, cognitive, literacy, and mathematics. So when we talk about kindergarten readiness, we mean children are assessed as ready on all 6 of these domains. So our analysis started by looking at the demographics of unserved the unserved eligible population. The Department of Early Learning provided us with estimates on the total number of unserved eligible children by county throughout the state, but that information didn't have demographics attached to it. So we used the American Community Survey to estimate the racial and ethnic composition of these children using data that shows us who the 3 and 4-year-olds are in those different counties that are living in low-income families. And what we found was that approximately 6 in every 10 unserved children for ECAP are children of color. And Latino children represent the largest share of the unserved eligible population at 41%, followed by 38% white children. We then estimated the potential kindergarten readiness of these children if they were to reach similar levels of development as children currently served by ECAP at the end of their pre-K year. Because without an ECAP expansion, we could assume that unserved eligible children may have similar levels of kindergarten readiness as the average low-income kindergartner, which is 33% currently. Our analysis applies the kindergarten readiness rates of ECAP children to the unserved eligible population by race ethnicity. So here you could see the differences in children that have ECAP versus low-income children overall. And when we did that, here's what we found. If the 23,000 unserved eligible children were to reach similar levels of development as their ECAP counterparts, we estimate an additional 7,900 children would be ready for kindergarten. Of these additional children, nearly half, 3,600, are Latino, followed by 40% white and 5% Black. These additional 7,900 children would increase the state's overall share of kindergarten readiness to 56% from 47%. That's a 20 percentage point increase. The share of Latino children ready for kindergarten would increase to 49% from 30%. The share of American Indian children would increase from 42% from 32%. And the share of Black children ready for kindergarten would increase to 51% from 41%. So there's gains across the board for the state and by race and ethnic groups. And then when we look at it geographically, kindergarten readiness would increase all across the state, with the largest growth in central and eastern Washington. And counties that particularly stand out include Yakima, Adams, and Franklin. And so that's our latest research brief. We know ECAP is not the single policy fix for closing the racial gap in kindergarten readiness, but it's an effective program and it serves some of our most low-income Washingtonians and helps to increase access to opportunities that promote kindergarten readiness. If we're able to serve the 23,000 eligible unserved children who are predominantly children of color and are low income, it would yield tremendous and long-lasting benefits for our state.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'd like to turn it now to Roxana Norouzi of OneAmerica to talk about advancing equity in K-12 education. So I'm just going to unmute her. And Roxana, can you please tell us about what OneAmerica is working on this legislative session?
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you to the Budget and Policy Center for inviting me to talk today. For those of you who don't know about OneAmerica, OneAmerica is a statewide immigrant advocacy organization, and our mission is to build power in immigrant communities through advancing the fundamental principles of democracy and justice. That is a big mission, and the way that we achieve our mission is through two primary goals. One is grassroots community organizing to build power. So we work with leaders across the state, developing their leadership and their collective advocacy skills to advocate for changes at the local, state, and federal level. And then we also, as an organization, advocate for changes that improve opportunities in the lives of immigrant and refugees in our state. Our work on education in particular, over the last 5 years, we've developed a specific strategy focusing on closing the opportunity gap with a strong lens around racial equity. Education has always been a cornerstone of OneAmerica's work, but over the last 5 years, we've developed a strategy that combines our different strengths as an organization. One is the grassroots organizing. So we organize parents and youth, mostly in South King County, but also across the state, and develop their leadership and strengthen their collective voice to make change at the local and state level in the education system. We also staff and facilitate a couple different coalitions, namely one focused on the improving outcomes for English language learners in public school systems, and we call those our grass top advocates, or folks within systems that have power to leverage change. And then we also focus on policy and systems change. One thing I want to emphasize on this slide in particular is that our goal is not only to close the gap, but to actually shift our education system to reflect our changing demographics and have a stronger focus on the assets and benefits of immigrants and other students of color. That is one of the ways that we as an organization, alongside many of our allies, see that we can operationalize racial equity by not only looking at data and closing gaps, but also at the experiences of our children and families in the public school system, and making sure that we're investing in programs and in innovation that meets the needs of our changing population. So a little bit about our state policy work. Again, our base of grassroots and grass top leaders have always been very instrumental in helping us determine what are the state policy issues that we will fight for as an organization. And over the last 5 years, some of the things that we fought for and successfully won in state policy, one is in 2013, we identified that as part of the McCleary package, something that was missing is that ELL students were not getting funded once they exited out of programs, and that is often when we saw English language learners falling into the opportunity gap. So we fought for some additional funding to support transitions for English language learners into the basic ed programs, and that was at the tune of $18.8 million. We also, many of you may be familiar with the Washington State DREAM Act, which expands the state need grant, which is our state financial aid for higher education to undocumented students or students without status, which also includes DACA eligible students. In addition to the Washington State DREAM Act, we've also passed the Seal of Biliteracy, which is a symbolic recognition of bilingual and biliterate skills of high school graduates, and they get this additional seal on their transcript that is recognized by institutes of higher education. And then finally, we've also advocated quite a bit for hardwiring racial equity into our early learning system. So as our system is developing and our early learning system is becoming more professionalized, we've fought for some provisions to ensure that diverse providers stay employed in the field, and also that we're honoring and actually giving credit for cultural and linguistic markers of equity, of quality in early learning. So why dual language, and what are dual language classrooms? Dual language are classrooms in which students, either in early learning or in K-12 settings, are learning 2 languages simultaneously. This may mean that they're spending 2 days in a target language like Vietnamese or Spanish and 3 days in English, or it may mean that they're learning 4 days a week in the target language to start, and then it shifts to 2 days. It may also mean that they spend half their day learning in the target language, half their day in the other. But the bottom line is that the outcome of dual language programs is that kids leave fully fluent and biliterate in 2 languages. Dual language programs have the power to transform Washington schools to reflect our changing demographic while also significantly improving outcomes for all students. So some of the reasons why, as an organization, we have doubled down on advocating for dual language learning and why we think it's such an important move for our education system. One is that it has strong evidence that demonstrates that it can close the opportunity gap for ELLs. So we have longitudinal data that shows us that ELL students who begin dual language programs in kindergarten are meeting academic standards and surpassing their peers by 6th grade. So it's been highly effective for ELL students, but it also is highly effective for monolingual English-speaking students. They've also outperformed their peers, English-speaking students who are in dual language programs. And there's some new research coming out that demonstrates that also for English-speaking African American and Native American students, it has shown to close the opportunity gap given the different contextual environment of the classrooms and honoring diversity. Currently, only 3% of our English language learners are enrolled in dual language classrooms, even though we know and research has shown that this is the best way to support increased outcomes for this student population. So one of the ways we've been framing this is that investing in dual language programs is a way to make McCleary dollars work more effectively and to ensure that those dollars are actually being invested in closing the opportunity gap. We also know that dual language classrooms promote cross-cultural learning. They increase parent engagement because parents can see themselves more clearly in their children's learning and in the classroom environment. And it also shifts language from being a deficit. So oftentimes we'll say kids aren't ready for kindergarten because they don't speak English, to actually being a strength and honoring that bilingualism is something that we want children and families to bring into their classroom experience. So what does this look like in terms of policy? In 2015, we actually crafted a bill together with our many leaders and supporters across the state. And that bill was not passed, but what was passed was a proviso in the budget that provided grants to different school districts to give them some additional money and capacity to build their dual language programs. So that money was granted out by OSPI, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, and we currently have 6 school districts that have new dual language programs that did not exist before that proviso. Given the success of that, and again, working over the last 2 years with our community advocates, our partners, our parents and youth, we collectively rewrote a new bill this session, House Bill 1445, Senate Bill 5529, that included 3 key components that would expand dual language in early learning and K-12 across our state. One is preschool grants. So similar to what Jennifer was talking about earlier, we would build in some additional supports to go out to ECAP providers to shift ECAP classrooms to being dual language classrooms, classrooms in which preschoolers are learning 2 languages simultaneously, and grants would be provided to give those schools and providers some additional capacity to provide professional development, develop curriculum, and get infrastructure in place to transition into dual language classrooms. The second piece is to K-12 school districts. Similar to what we did in 2015, we expanded the number of school districts that would get grants to build their capacity to shift from being monolingual English classroom settings to dual language instructional settings. And then finally, the third piece of the bill is something that we heard very loud and clear from our school districts and our communities, that one of the most significant barriers to sustaining and establishing dual language programs is that there are not enough bilingual teachers across the state to teach in these classrooms. And so the third piece that we wrote into the bill is grants to school districts to provide some staffing capacity for someone within the school district to be recruiting bilingual individuals who could become teachers within a time period, and also to support the retainment of bilingual teachers within the schools and within the classrooms. So that bill currently, it's taken a lot of twists and turns, but overall has received a significant amount of bipartisan support from both sides of the aisle as well as both chambers. And we've built through the coalitions and the grassroots advocacy that we've worked on over the last few years. We've really built a lot of support for the bill. Actually, over the summer, we had a number of legislators visit in the fall, we had a number of legislators visit dual language classrooms so they themselves could see the power of learning in two languages at once and the impact it has on children's learning, their confidence, and their identity development. And that was a huge pathway into the amount of support we've received for the bill. So the bill has taken a few different twists and turns. The House bill was passed off the House floor. The Senate bill was not passed, but the House bill went over to the Senate and has passed through all the chambers. And on Wednesday, an amended version of the bill was passed on the Senate floor with a 45-4 bipartisan vote. Huge win. The bill was amended, so a few things I want to mention. The K-12 grants are still included in the bill. How the amount of grants that we'll be able to actually grant out will be dependent on some of the negotiations that happen between the House and the Senate around how much money is appropriated for the bill. And then there was another bill that 5712 that was integrated into the language that is very complementary to what we were putting forth, but more focused on middle and high school students who are bilingual and supporting them to become future teachers. Unfortunately, a few of the things that got cut out of the bill through the process, one was the ECAP grant did not make it through this version of the bill. What did make it through is some language around the Department of Early Learning doing outreach to parents and communities around the importance of home language, and also some professional development that will be provided to the field to expand the early learning field's capacity to serve dual language learners. A few calls to action or things that you can do for those on the call. It would be great to look up the vote count and see if your representative either in the House or the Senate supported the bill. Send them a thank you and really encourage your support for dual language learning across Washington State. There is one more hurdle until the bill gets to the governor's desk, which is the conference that the House and the Senate have to do to agree on some of the amendments, but we're hopeful that will move forward. The other big piece is that we have launched a campaign around promoting the benefits of home language and beyond policy and advocacy, building public will, both with our communities, our parents and youth, as well as our educators, folks who work in the system, to see home language as a benefit and a strength. And you can find, we have a whole website dedicated to this campaign with materials, one-pagers, toolkits that you can download and utilize to promote home language development and the positive benefits of bilingualism. And finally, I'd like to wrap up with leaving you with this quote of what inspires me to do this work, and also why I think dual language learning is such an important piece of the conversation around racial equity and closing the opportunity gap. This quote is from one of our parent leaders who is a refugee from Somalia, Regina Elmi, and one of the things that she said is that when she was 9, she left Somalia because of civil war and came to the U.S. and initially placed more language on English and neglected her own language. Now, as a mother of 3 girls, I fear not passing my Somali language to them. With the power to advocate and influence early learning and education, I believe that my daughters and future generations of immigrant families will have the opportunity to keep their native language or culture and still embrace being Americans without feeling the need to choose one over the other. So with that, I think we have a few minutes for questions, and I'll pass things back to the Budget Policy Center team to field any questions from the group.
Thanks, Roxana. We do have one question from the audience. The question is, I think maybe for Jennifer here. Jennifer, will there be a major ECAP expansion? And how many more children do we expect will be served next year?
So ECAP is going to be an item on the 2017-19 state budget, and there were 11,700 slots in 2015-16, but we don't yet know how many new slots are going to be funded for the next biennium. And the Senate budget proposal included 1,200 new slots, and the House proposal included 2,400 new slots. I think that's to be determined.
Great, thanks. And it looks like we don't have any more questions, so we'll wrap things up here. Thank you all for joining us today on this Budget Beat, and many thanks to Roxana Norouzi and Jennifer Tran for leading this webinar. Stay tuned for the next Budget Beat, which will probably come out sometime next month as we wrap up session, hopefully. Details will be sent out later, and stay tuned to our website, budgetandpolicy.org, for a recording of this call. And after you sign off, a survey will pop up on your screen, and we'd appreciate if you give feedback. And everyone have a great weekend. Thanks.